Hello everyone. Before we begin, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment saying where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories like this. Now let's begin. The first night I saw the light moving between the trees, I told myself it was just another lookout doing a routine check. That's what made the most sense. There were 3 of us assigned to that mountain range that summer. 3 towers, miles apart, connected only by radio and a narrow dirt road that twisted up the hills like it didn't want to be there. I remember how still it was. No wind, no animals, just that deep forest silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing against your ears. I was standing on the small balcony of the fire lookout tower, leaning on the railing, scanning the horizon the way I always did before heading inside. The sun had just dropped behind the ridge, leaving the sky gray and flat. That's when I saw it. A faint white light, low to the ground, weaving slowly between the trees below my tower. Not steady like a parked vehicle. Not flashing like emergency lights. Just moving. Slow. Careful. There wasn't supposed to be anyone down there. The service road ended 2 miles back. Hikers weren't allowed off trail after dark. And even if someone ignored the rules, they wouldn't be walking that deep into the restricted zone without a reason. I remember grabbing the radio, my hand already damp with sweat even though I didn't know why. Anyone doing ground patrol near Station 3? I asked. Static. Then a calm voice from Mark at the North Tower. Negative. I waited for Lena from the South Tower to answer. Nothing. Just a long hiss of empty air. The light stopped moving, and for a second, just 1 second, I had the strange feeling it had stopped because it knew I was watching. I kept watching that spot for almost 10 minutes, barely breathing. The light didn't move again. It just stayed there, low and steady like it was resting. Or waiting. Eventually it went out. Not faded. Not walked away. Just gone. I told myself it was someone crouching down. Maybe they turned it off after hearing my voice over the radio. But that explanation didn't sit right. The radio couldn't carry that far down the slope unless the wind carried it perfectly. I tried Lena again. Station 2, you there? Nothing. That wasn't normal. Lena always answered. Even if she was half asleep, she'd respond with something sarcastic. We'd been up there for almost 6 weeks. You start depending on those small check-ins. They remind you that you're not completely alone. Mark finally came back on. You good? Yeah, I said, though my mouth felt dry. Just saw something weird in the trees. He paused. Not long, but long enough. What kind of weird? I told him. He didn't laugh. That bothered me more than if he had. Probably a camper, he said. We've had people sneak in before. But that deep? I asked. Silence again. Then, lock your hatch tonight. That was it. No reassurance. No offer to drive over in the morning. Just that. I locked the hatch. I checked it twice. Then I checked the windows, even though they didn't open more than a few inches. I pulled the curtains halfway closed, which I never did. From inside, the forest looked different. The trees felt closer, like they were leaning in. I barely slept. Around 2 a.m., the radio crackled by itself. Not a full transmission. Just a burst of static sharp enough to wake me. I reached for it immediately. Lena? I said. Nothing. Then I heard breathing. Soft. Uneven. Close to the mic. Mark, cut it out, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The breathing stopped. A few seconds later, Lena's voice came through, but it sounded wrong. Quieter than usual. Flat. Did one of you just key the mic? No, I said quickly. Was that you? No. Mark came on next. Both of you relax. Radios glitch up here all the time. But his voice wasn't calm anymore. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I used the binoculars to scan the slope where I'd seen the light. At first, everything looked normal. Pine trees, rocks, dry brush. Then I noticed something about 20 yards from the base of my tower. A patch of flattened grass. Like someone had been standing there for a long time. Facing up. I didn't tell them about the flattened grass right away. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to believe there was still a simple explanation. But by late afternoon, the feeling in my chest hadn't gone away. It had only grown heavier. Around sunset, Mark radioed in. Hey, he said, casual, almost too casual. I'm gonna drive down and check the perimeter near your tower. Just to calm everyone down. That surprised me. The night before, he'd sounded distant. Detached. Now he was suddenly helpful.
Yeah.
Should be there in 20. I asked. I watched the dirt road through binoculars until I saw his truck winding up the ridge. Seeing it made me feel better for a second. A solid thing. A person I knew. He parked near the base and stepped out. I waved from above. He didn't wave back. He just stood there, looking up at me. Then he walked toward the patch of flattened grass. My stomach dropped. He didn't search for it. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight to it. He stood in the exact spot I'd seen through the binoculars that morning. And then he slowly looked up at me. Even from that distance, I could feel it. That same feeling from the night before. Like prey realizing it's been studied. The radio crackled. "You see anything strange?" Mark asked. His voice sounded normal through the speaker. Calm. Friendly. I couldn't speak. He lifted something in his hand. A flashlight. The same dull white beam I had watched weaving through the trees. "I figured," he continued softly, "if someone was watching you, they'd stand right about here." My heart was pounding so hard it made my vision shake. "You told me to lock my hatch," I said, barely above a whisper. There was a long pause. Then he smiled. "I just wanted to see if you would." I locked the radio and stepped back from it like it had burned me. Down below, Mark was still standing in that spot, the flashlight hanging loose in his hand. He didn't move for almost a full minute. Just stared up at the tower. Then he turned and walked back to his truck. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I grabbed my phone and called the ranger station directly, not over the shared radio channel. My voice was shaking so badly, I had to repeat myself 3 times before they understood what I was saying. They told me to stay inside, to lock everything, to not respond to any radio communication unless it came directly from them. For the next hour, Mark kept trying to reach me. "Station 3, you there?" "Static. Just wanted to check on you." "Static." At one point, his tone changed. Not angry. Not loud. Just colder. "You know this job gets lonely." I sat on the floor with my back against the metal hatch, like that thin layer of steel could stop anything. Every small sound felt amplified, the creak of the tower shifting in the wind, the hum of insects outside, my own breathing. By the time the Rangers arrived, his truck was gone. They found fresh footprints circling the base of the tower. Mine from earlier. And his. Lena quit the same week. She said she didn't feel safe anymore. Mark was suspended pending investigation. I finished the season. But I never stood on that balcony after dark again. They never proved anything. That's the part that stays with me the most. Mark said he was just testing response protocols. That he'd noticed tension between stations and wanted to see how we'd react under pressure. He said the flashlight in the trees was a coincidence. A routine patrol he forgot to log. He said I misread his tone. That isolation makes people imagine threats where there aren't any. And maybe that's what scares me the most. How reasonable he sounded. No charges were filed. He wasn't allowed back that season, but I heard later he applied to another district. I don't know if they hired him. What I do know is this. He watched me before I knew I was being watched. He studied how I reacted. He circled my tower at night just to feel that control. And when he told me to lock my hatch, it wasn't advice. It was a reminder that he knew exactly how exposed I was. Out there, you depend on the people on the other towers. You trust the voices that come through the radio. They're your only connection to the world. After that summer, I don't trust quiet voices the same way. Sometimes I still wake up thinking I hear static in the dark, soft breathing on the other end, waiting to see if I'll answer. And I always wonder what would have happened if I hadn't locked that hatch the first night he told me to. I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Not loud, not rushing, just slow, steady steps climbing the metal staircase that wrapped around my tower. At first, I thought I was still dreaming. The sun wasn't up yet. The sky outside the windows was that dull blue right before morning. My shift didn't start for another hour. No one was scheduled to visit. The steps stopped right below the hatch. I held my breath and stared at the ceiling. There are certain sounds you get used to in a lookout tower. Wind pushing against the glass, wood creaking as temperatures change, the distant hum of insects. But footsteps on metal? That's not something you confuse. I waited for a knock. Nothing. Just silence. Then very gently the hatch handle rattled. Once. Twice. Like someone checking if it was locked. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. My body felt stiff, like if I shifted even a little, whoever was out there would hear it. "Hello," a voice called softly. It was a man's voice. Calm. Friendly. "Close. Sorry to bother you." I knew that voice. It belonged to Daniel. He was the seasonal worker assigned to supply runs between the towers. He dropped off water and batteries 2 days earlier. Quiet guy. Polite. Kept to himself. But he wasn't supposed to be here before sunrise. And definitely not without radioing first. I know you're awake, he added, still soft. Your light's on. I slowly looked toward the small desk lamp near the window. It was on. I hadn't turned it on. A cold feeling spread through my chest. I was sure I'd switched everything off before going to bed. The hatch handle rattled again. Not harder. Just patient. I forgot something last time, he said. Just need a minute. I slid off the bed as quietly as I could and stepped backward toward the radio. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost knocked it off the desk. Daniel, I said into the mic, keeping my voice low. Why are you at my tower? The radio stayed silent. Outside the hatch, his voice came again. I don't have my radio. I left it in the truck, he said. The problem was, I couldn't see his truck. From the east-facing window, I had a clear view of the narrow service road that led up to my tower. It curved around the ridge before stopping near the base. There was no vehicle parked there. No headlights. No engine sound cooling in the morning air. Where did you park? I asked, louder this time. A pause. Down the bend, he replied. Didn't want to wake you. That didn't make sense. The bend was too far. He would have had to hike up through brush in the dark. And no one did that. Not alone. The hatch handle stopped moving. I stepped closer to the window and leaned just enough to see the staircase. His boots were visible through the narrow gap between the railing and the platform. Muddy. Still. He wasn't shifting his weight. Wasn't fidgeting. Just standing there. Can you open up? He asked. His voice changed slightly. Still soft, but flatter now. It's cold. It wasn't cold. It was late summer. Warm even before sunrise. I pressed the radio button again. Base, this is Tower 4. Do you copy? Static. I tried the second channel. Then the third. Nothing but a low hiss. Outside, Daniel let out a small breath. I could hear it through the metal hatch. You're not answering because you don't trust me, he said quietly. That's smart. My throat tightened. How long have you been awake? He asked. The question felt wrong. Personal. Like he'd been paying attention. I didn't respond. I saw your light turn on at 3, he continued. You walked to the window. You stood there for a while. My stomach dropped. 3 a.m. I had woken up briefly to use the bathroom. I remembered standing near the window for a second, half asleep, staring into the trees without really seeing anything. That meant he was already outside then. Watching. I just want to talk, he said. And for the first time, I realized he wasn't asking to come inside. He just wanted me to know he was there. My legs felt weak, but my mind was racing. If he had been out there since 3, that meant he came in the middle of the night. Quiet enough that I never heard him climb the stairs the first time. Quiet enough to stand below my window and watch me move around inside. You should leave, I said, forcing the words out. Another long pause. I could, he replied. But then you'd still think about this. His boots shifted slightly on the metal. A slow scrape. I just wanted to see something, he continued. How you act when you realize you're not alone. The way he said it made my skin crawl. There was no anger in his voice. No rush. Just curiosity. I backed away from the hatch and grabbed the emergency flare from the cabinet. My hands were slick with sweat. I didn't even know what I would do with it. The tower was too high to jump. The stairs were too narrow to run past him. I told Base I was coming here today, he said casually. If you report this, it'll just look like I showed up early. Then I pressed the radio and chest tightened. Nothing. A second sound on the stairs. A light metallic creak. Lower. Slower. Like someone else shifting their weight. Daniel didn't react. Didn't turn. Didn't acknowledge it. Did you hear that? I asked before I could stop myself. Silence. Then, softly, almost amused, he said, Hear what? The stairs creaked again. This time closer to the bottom. And I realized something horrible. If someone else was on those stairs, it meant Daniel wasn't alone. It meant one of them had been watching from below, while the other climbed up to talk to me. My heart was beating so hard it made my ears ring. I moved slowly toward the west window, the only angle where I could see the lower half of the staircase. At first, I didn't see anyone, just the metal steps twisting down toward the ground. Then I saw a hand, wrapped around the railing near the bottom. Pale. Still. Not climbing. Not moving. Just holding on. I stepped back so fast I hit the table behind me. The flare slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor. The sound echoed inside the tower. Outside, Daniel finally shifted. "You're making this worse," he said quietly. "Worse. Like this was something I was doing. Who's with you?" I asked, my voice shaking now. No answer. The hand on the railing tightened slightly. I could see the fingers flex. Daniel let out a slow breath. "I told him you'd panic." "Him." The word felt heavy. "You shouldn't have come up," he added, almost disappointed. "You were supposed to stay quiet." My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. They had planned this. One to distract me at the hatch. The other staying low, out of sight, watching how long it took me to notice. Watching how scared I'd get. "Open the hatch," Daniel said, and for the first time, there was no softness left in his voice. "We're not leaving without finishing." "Finishing what?" The hand at the bottom of the stairs started moving. Slowly climbing. One step at a time. Metal groaned under the weight. I grabbed the flare gun with both hands and stumbled toward the hatch. I didn't think. I just acted. When the boots came into view through the gap under the door, I fired. The flare exploded against the metal staircase with a blinding flash, and a scream followed. Not loud, but sharp and real. I heard scrambling. Heavy steps rushing downward. Someone slipping. A body hitting the railing. Then silence. Not forest silence. The kind that comes after something goes very wrong. I stood there shaking, the flare gun empty in my hands, waiting for the footsteps to come back up. They didn't. But I never heard them reach the bottom either. I stayed frozen for I don't know how long. My arms hurt from gripping the flare gun so tightly. The smell of burned metal drifted through the cracks in the hatch. Smoke curled past the edges and into the room. No voices. No footsteps. Just the forest waking up. Birds started calling like nothing had happened. The sky slowly turned pale orange. It felt wrong that the world was moving forward. I forced myself to crawl toward the west window again. Every part of me expected to see them standing there, staring back up. The staircase was empty. All the way down. No bodies. No movement. But halfway along the railing, a dark smear marked the metal where the flare had exploded. And on the steps below it, I saw something that made my stomach turn. A small piece of fabric, burned at the edge, caught on the corner of a step like it had been torn loose during a fall. I grabbed the radio again. This time the bass answered. My voice didn't sound like mine when I explained what happened. They told me to stay inside and wait. Rangers would be dispatched immediately. It took them almost an hour to reach my tower. By then, the only proof left was the scorch mark and that scrap of fabric. No footprints in the dirt. No truck on the road. No sign of anyone in the trees. They searched the area for the rest of the day. Nothing. Daniel didn't show up for his next scheduled shift. His cabin near the supply depot was empty. Bed unmade. Some clothes gone. And the strangest part, there was no record of a second seasonal worker assigned to our district that summer. But I saw that hand. I know I did. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear two different sets of footsteps on those stairs. I woke to the smell of smoke before I heard it. Not the dry, distant smoke from the ridge fires we monitored, but something closer. Acrid, choking, the kind that stings your eyes and makes your throat tighten. I blinked against the dark, trying to see through the thin curtains of my tower. The forest was still, unusually still, like it had paused to listen too. At first, I thought maybe a nearby campfire had gotten out of control. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized the haze was moving, curling through the treetops in slow, deliberate spirals. It didn't smell like wood burned in a fire pit. It smelled sharp, chemical. I grabbed the binoculars, even though it was pitch black. I trained them on the slope below the tower and froze. A figure crouched near the base, half hidden in the underbrush, holding a small metal container. The moment I focused, it moved, careful, measured, like it knew exactly what it was doing. My stomach turned. We weren't supposed to have anyone on that part of the ridge. The road ended miles back, and that trail was strictly off limits. Whoever it was had hiked through dense forest just to be there. And now, standing in the shadow of my tower, I realized they could see me too. I reached for the radio, but my fingers hesitated. My hand shook. The forest seemed too quiet, too empty. I knew if I spoke, they'd hear me. If I didn't know what would happen next. The figure froze as I adjusted the binoculars again. And for a terrifying moment, I felt like it wasn't just hiding, it was waiting. Waiting for me to make a mistake. I stayed frozen on the balcony, watching the figure shift slightly among the low branches. Every movement felt calculated, like they were testing the perimeter before making their next move. My fingers stayed on the radio, but I couldn't bring myself to call anyone. Something about the way they moved told me that calling for help might make it worse. Minutes stretched like hours. The sun started to rise, painting the forest in dull orange light, but it didn't make me feel safer. If anything, it made the figure clearer. A man, mid-30s maybe, dressed in dark clothing that blended perfectly with the pine shadows. His face was partially covered by a hood, but I could see the intent in his posture, sharp, precise, unnerving. I tried to tell myself it was just a prank, a hiker gone too far. But the area was closed for a reason. No one should be this close to the tower before anyone else is awake. And then I noticed the faint trail of footprints in the soft soil below. Fresh, heading toward the tower from the back ridge. Someone had been creeping up behind me without a sound. I ducked inside, keeping my eyes on the figure through the small window by the desk. My heart was racing so fast I could feel it in my throat. Every instinct screamed to lock the tower and wait for daylight, but I couldn't stop noticing small things that didn't make sense. My water supply had been moved slightly. The batteries I left on the shelf were no longer aligned. Even the note I'd left on the desk seemed nudged to the edge. Then the radio clicked. Not with words, just a static pop. I grabbed it immediately. "Station 4? A voice said, calm, almost too calm. I froze. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Don't be afraid," it said. "I just want to see how you handle being watched." That was it. No explanation. Just those words, like a warning. I realized with a sinking dread that I wasn't just being observed. I was being studied. And whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be accidental. By mid-afternoon, I could no longer ignore the sense of being surrounded. The figure wasn't moving much, just lingering near the base of the tower, hidden in the trees, shifting occasionally as if measuring my reactions. My nerves were raw, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig to the balcony, trying to see if I could make them leave. That's when I noticed another set of footprints, smaller, lighter, weaving between the pines. Someone else. Not the man I could see. Someone else had come silently into the same area. My stomach dropped. They weren't alone. I backed into the tower, pressing myself against the wall. My phone was useless, no signal. The radio channels were empty. And outside, the figure started climbing the slope slowly, deliberate, like they knew every weak spot in my defenses. I picked up a flare gun from the cabinet, my hands trembling so badly it was hard to aim. The figure reached the first ledge of the service stairs. Their boots scraped lightly against the metal. I fired the flare, and it burst with a sudden, blinding light. The figure recoiled, but not away, toward the shadowed trees. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate laugh. Close. Behind me. I spun around. Another person, smaller, lighter, hidden in the dark corner of the tower. The one whose footprints I'd seen. My heart stopped. They weren't attacking yet. They just stood there, silent, watching my every move. I realized then that they had been inside the tower, while I thought I was safe. The first figure below wasn't the only threat, and both of them had been studying me for hours. I fired the flare again, hoping to scare them, but the smaller one didn't flinch. The larger one below disappeared into the trees, moving silently, almost melting into the forest. My breath came in ragged gasps. I felt trapped, completely alone, but now I knew there were two of them, and I had no way out. I stayed pressed against the wall for what felt like hours, waiting for them to move, to make a sound, to come back. The tower was quiet now, but that quiet was worse than any noise. Every creak, every gust of wind against the metal siding made my stomach twist. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My hands never stopped shaking. Eventually, the first light of evening hit the trees. I climbed cautiously to the balcony, keeping the flare gun ready. The slope below was empty. No figure. No footprints. Nothing that could prove anyone had been there. Just a few broken branches and the faint burn marks where the flare had hit earlier. I radioed base. My voice sounded hollow, trembling. They told me to stay put until a ranger could reach me. When they arrived hours later, the forest was empty. No trace of the smaller figure inside the tower. No trace of the man who had been at the base. I packed up my gear that night, leaving early. Lena refused to come on the shift with me. Mark and the others didn't ask questions. Everyone stayed silent, pretending nothing happened. But I knew it wasn't over. Sometimes, even now, when I walk past a window or a dark stairwell, I think I see a shadow lingering just out of reach. I know what it feels like to be watched so closely that even the smallest move seems dangerous. And I know that, no matter how far I go, the forest remembers. I still can't shake the feeling that they learned something about me that day. Not just my fear, but the way I think, the way I move when I feel trapped. I replay it constantly, the soft steps on the metal stairs, the way the smaller one just watched me without a word, the way the man at the base seemed to vanish into the forest as if he had never been there. No one was ever caught. No records. No explanations. The rangers shrugged it off as a prank or trespassers. But I know better. They weren't random. They were deliberate. I can still feel their eyes in moments of quiet, the memory of being measured, tested, hunted without a single word of warning. I left the lookout program after that season. The isolation, the trust that had been broken, it was too much. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I hear the faintest scrape on stairs or a soft, controlled breathing. I've checked. No one's there. But the memory keeps me alert, keeps me aware that people can watch without anyone ever knowing. And maybe the worst part, I'll never know why they chose me, why they were so careful, so precise. I survived, but only because I reacted quickly, only because I noticed small details that saved me. The forest is quiet again, but I carry the weight of that day everywhere I go. And I know somewhere out there, they're still waiting, learning, and maybe, just maybe, they'll come back. The wind had stopped entirely that night, and the forest felt wrong, too still, too expectant. I remember leaning against the railing of the tower, staring down at the road that snaked through the trees. Moonlight barely touched the dirt, leaving shadows thick enough to hide a person. I thought I heard something moving below, a scrape against rock, faint enough to be a trick of the mind, but then it came again. Deliberate. Footsteps. Slow. Not walking, not running. Just pacing. Back and forth. I grabbed the binoculars and swept the slope. Nothing. Not a single shape. Not a flicker of movement. Still, the sound didn't stop. The radio was silent. Mark and Lena were asleep, or pretending to be. I couldn't tell. I didn't want to speak anyway. Some instinct told me that if whoever, or whatever, was down there realized I knew, it could change everything. Then I saw it. A shadow slipping between the pines, moving unnaturally straight, like it was following a path only it could see. It froze when I caught sight of it, just for a second, long enough to make me notice that the movement wasn't random. It was calculated. Something about it made my stomach twist. Not fear exactly. Not yet, but unease. And a certainty that this night was going to change everything. I reached for the flashlight, but my hand stopped midair. Because I realized I wasn't just watching it. It was watching me. And in that moment, I knew that isolation wasn't just a part of this job. That night, it became a trap. I stayed pressed against the railing, trying to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But the movements were too precise, too human, and something about the silence around it made the forest feel wrong. I reached for the radio to check in with Mark and Lena, but the static came first. A low, almost impatient hiss that made my teeth ache. I keyed the mic, my fingers shaking. "Station 4, do you copy?" Nothing. The shadow shifted again. This time, it moved closer to the road, toward the base of the tower. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it down, sweeping the beam slowly. A figure stepped into the light. Male, average height, dark clothing that blended perfectly with the night. He didn't run, didn't wave, didn't even pause. Just stared up at the tower. I swallowed hard, keeping my hands on the railing. My mind raced. How did he get here? The road had been locked at the base. No one was supposed to be out here. Then I noticed a small movement behind him, a faint shadow against the trees, barely visible. Another person, smaller, crouched low, watching me from the underbrush. I couldn't tell if they were waiting for a signal, or just studying me silently. Panic rose, hot and sudden. Every instinct screamed to climb back inside, to lock the hatch, to call someone. But the radio was dead. I couldn't leave the balcony without being seen. And they were too close now to pretend this was a mistake. The taller one raised something small in his hand. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. Then the beam of a flashlight flickered toward me. The smaller shadow shifted closer. And I realized I wasn't just being watched. I was being surrounded. The flashlight beam hit the tower railing, and I froze. My heart slammed against my chest so hard I thought it might burst. The taller figure's eyes reflected in the light, calm, cold, and precise. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He was just waiting, like a predator does before it decides how to strike. The smaller shadow crept closer to the base of the stairs, moving with careful, quiet steps. I could see their hand brush against the metal railing, testing it, mapping it, learning every inch. My stomach nodded. They had done this before. Someone had taught them how to get this close without making a sound. I grabbed the flare gun from the cabinet, shaking so badly I could barely aim. The taller one tilted his head slightly, almost as if he knew exactly what I was doing. My fingers tightened on the trigger. Then the smaller one made a soft, deliberate sound, a whisper of movement against the floorboards. It was close enough that I could almost hear their breathing. "Don't move," the taller one said softly, and it wasn't a warning. It was a statement. I fired the flare anyway. It cracked the night with blinding light. The taller figure jerked back, the beam swinging wildly. The smaller one tripped on the bottom step and let out a soft grunt as they hit the metal railing. For a moment, everything froze. Silence. Then heavy footsteps rushing away into the trees. Not running, but fast enough that I knew they were leaving. I stayed on the balcony, holding the empty flare gun, watching the shadows stretch and fade into the forest. My chest burned. My hands ached. I realized then they had planned this carefully. Both of them, each with a role, each waiting for me to make a mistake. I had survived, but only barely, and I knew they weren't gone. I didn't move for a long time, just pressed against the wall of the tower, staring at the empty slope. The forest had returned to its usual sounds, rustling leaves, distant birds, but nothing sounded right anymore. Every branch snapping in the wind made my stomach twist. I grabbed the radio again. This time, the bass finally answered. My voice shook so badly I had to repeat myself several times. They told me to stay put, to lock the tower, and wait for rangers to arrive. I did exactly that, pacing only enough to keep my legs from cramping. When the rangers finally reached the tower, the slope below was clean. No footprints, no truck, no sign of anyone ever being there. The only proof that the events had happened were the small scorch mark from my flare and the faint smudge on the railing where the smaller one had brushed it during their climb. Lena refused to return for the rest of the season. Mark didn't ask questions. Everyone treated it like nothing had happened, but I knew better. I had seen the way they planned, the way they tested my reactions. I had felt the weight of their eyes, their patience, their control. Even after leaving the tower, I couldn't shake the paranoia. Every dark stairwell, every shadow in the trees, reminded me that someone could be out there watching. And knowing they had studied me that day, I knew I would never feel safe in a quiet forest again. I still think about that night. Not just the fear, but the way it changed me. Before that, I trusted the forest, trusted the routine, trusted the voices over the radio. Afterward, I realized how fragile that trust really is. They didn't need to hurt me to make their point. Watching, testing, surrounding me in silence, that was enough. I remember the way the smaller one moved inside the tower, so careful, so patient. I remember the taller one's eyes, cold and calculating, like they were cataloging every reaction, every twitch, every heartbeat. No one was ever caught. No one explained anything. Rangers said it could have been pranksters or trespassers, but I know better. They weren't random. They were deliberate. Even now, years later, I hear faint sounds in quiet places, the scrape of a boot, the soft shift of weight. I check the corners, the shadows, the trees, and I feel that same rush of dread. Because I know someone could be watching. Someone could be studying me, and I'll never know why they chose me. The forest looks peaceful now. But peace is a lie. I survived, yes. But I carry that night with me, and sometimes I wonder if one day they'll come back. Not to finish what they started, but just to watch again.